biography of Elon Musk, Walter Isaacson. So it came out 2 days ago. I hope everyone on this call has downloaded your copy on Kindle or because that you can get available immediately and begin to read this book. He's the first person since Wayne Azanga, who was my first interview I did when I was writing for Fortune magazine, who's built 3 multi-billion-dollar plus companies in 3 different industries. And I don't know about you, there's a lot of business books, but the biographies, particularly those by Walter Isaacson, hopefully you've all read the one on Steve Jobs, which was hugely insightful. A couple of things I want to pull from there. And now what I'm reading about how Elon Musk thought and scaled, I think is a must read. So everyone, that's your assignment for this weekend, is to grab that book. I'm going to be digging into it and writing about it tomorrow. And I wanted to kick off with a very practical idea. And that's what I want to demonstrate, that when you sign up and join us October 12th, there's not going to be a lot of theory. We're really there to say, okay, what are the practical decisions that we have to make if we're going to scale easier and more successfully? And it really does come down to decisions. Your success is just the sum total of all of the decisions that you make, you get your people to make, and you ultimately get the market to make in your favor. And that's why my second book, The Greatest Business Decisions of All Time, DP probably don't even know, but that book's genesis was in Delhi. I was there with my Indian brother from another mother, Raghu Potini. We were on tour of the country, and we were up in Delhi celebrating the end of that tour when we found out that Steve Jobs had passed away. So I was there in India. We raised a toast to him, and we got talking about what an amazing decision that was for the board to ultimately welcome Steve Jobs back. I mean, here he'd been gone for 10 years in the wilderness years, and they invited him back, and the rest is history. 2 months prior to his untimely death, he achieved the greatest market cap of any company in the history of the world, which it continues to hold that record 11 years later. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about. I don't know if anyone here on this webinar have any children. I have 4. 3 of them live in Barcelona. My only princess is in St. Louis. And if you think about it, the real measure of a parent is how do your children perform when you're not there? And you're going to read some very interesting things about Elon Musk's early childhood and how he had this infinite freedom in both a good and bad way to kind of do whatever he wanted to do, to wander the streets, to figure stuff out. We're talking about when he's like 2 years old and 3 years old and 5 years old. And that really, I think, is the measure of a parent, is how well do your children perform when you're not there. And it's really the same with your company. I mean, ultimately, what we're going to be talking about is how do you scale the valuation of the business? Yes, revenue and gross margin and profit and reach and impact and purpose, all of those are components. But those of you that are business owners, and I saw somewhere in the banking industry, we got somebody who owns some steel manufacturing and fabrication and all of that. It's equally important that you think of your business from an investor standpoint. And what are the things that you're doing in order to truly add value? Because you're going to need that value or valuation to possibly do acquisitions. If there's a hot opportunity right now, it's the latest book, Deep, as you know, I'm finishing up. I'm supposed to get chapters 4 and 5 this week. It'll be 6 total chapters. Is this opportunity to scale through acquisitions around the globe, a way that hidden champions have been able to expand their footprint. And ultimately, what you want to be able to do is have that valuation continue if you're not there. If the business is dependent on you, then you have caused its valuation to decrease. So how do we ultimately put in the tools, the processes, the systems that allow you to truly be freed up, to get your freedom back? I think we've said it in the accelerator deep, but the old joke is an entrepreneur is someone who would rather work 16 hours a day for themselves than 8 hours for someone else. And very quickly that quits becoming a joke. You covered the barriers a couple of weeks ago, and I opened that chapter in Scaling Up and Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, which have both been updated to 2022 numbers and stories. It just came out a few months ago. We opened with Alan Rudy, who literally was working 80-hour weeks. And that's okay. You've got to do that in the beginning, as Elon Musk has as he scaled his businesses. But at some point, if that's just turning your wheels, wasting time, and you're not making progress, both it wears you out and it's frustrating for the organization. And so what we want to do is provide you the tools. This is my 41st year of working with entrepreneurs to help them scale, and large companies as well. And so the first idea I want to share, we've got, for most of us, if we're looking at a fiscal year, calendar year, I don't know what your fiscal year is, but for 2023, we're facing the end of the final quarter, which will kick off October 1st. And 2 weeks ago at Harvard, a program we partnered with Harvard on a CEO summit, we hosted Hubert Joly. He's the great French CEO who turned around Best Buy, took their stock from $11 to $110. There's a 10x valuation increase in that company. And he said something really important that we've continued to use to frame this idea of the number one thing you need to do right now, and that is you don't have a strategy if you haven't named it. So October marks the start of the half year. Okay, cool, Deep, thanks. Nevertheless, you've got a quarter coming up. And as he said, you don't really have a strategy if you haven't named it. Let me say that again. You don't have a strategy if you haven't given it a name. So for instance, and one of the things I admire about Mark Zuckerberg, I met Mark when he was still at Harvard. He'd come over, I was teaching a workshop at Babson, and I didn't know who he was, and the world didn't know who he was. But I remember coming over to the class, and at the end he goes, "Professor Harnish." I go, "Yes. I got this business." I'm like, "All right." And I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Well, it helps guys pick up chicks on campus." And I'm like, "All right, get away, go away." Little did I know that one got away if I'd had a chance to invest. But the thing I admire most about Mark Zuckerberg is his disciplines. He practices the Rockefeller habits. And one of those is the importance of picking a theme. Everyone around the world, particularly the analysts in his industry, know that what has been Mark Zuckerberg Meta's theme for 2023, nothing fancy, but the year of efficiency. And now the way he acts on that is, and we think this is critical, number two, for every leader that's on this webinar, that your team wants to hear from you. Every Friday, I write an email to our 252 coaching partners around the world. They want to know where I am, what I'm thinking about. I did take a little break in August. I needed some vacation time as well, but got back in the saddle last week. And so what Mark Zuckerberg does every Thursday at 5 p.m., he has a Q&A with Mark. And it's a chance for all of his employees to tune in, show up either live in their auditorium or on FaceTime. And he there is to remind them, hey, I know we got a lot of other stuff going on, as all of you do. You've got 1,000 priorities. But what is this? What's the one thing that we've got to focus on the most next? And so he'll report out, first of all, how are we doing on our year of efficiency, even though we've launched threads and everything else. And as he wanders around, his question is, what are you working on? Well, is that going to make us more efficient? What are you working on? Is that going to make us more efficient? By the way, one of the big changes is they're taking their managers and turning them back into programmers. Well, how's it turned out? At their mid-year, July 28th, the analysts reported out, and by the way, the analysts even used the term in Meta's year of efficiency. So even the market knew his focus, They just added another 200 billion to their market cap. And so my first most important question going into this next quarter, starting October 1st, while you're trying to figure out everything else, the clock is ticking. If not now, when? What is this? And the importance of giving it a name. It doesn't have to be fancy. The year of efficiency is not fancy, but I think it needs that name. By the way, not to give it a name is like writing a book, but not giving it a title. Like, what are you reading right now? Well, it's a book about this guy who got beat up by his father. No, I'm reading a book called Elon Musk. What movie did you see? Well, it's about a guy that kind of blew stuff up. Oppenheimer. And so we give movies a title, we give books a title. It's critical you give your strategy a title. Now, if you'd like to, if any of you think, if any of you have one, I'd love for you to put that in to the chat. Our theme this year is acquisitions. Look, we got a lot of other stuff going on, and that's why I'm actually writing a book in that particular space. So that's number one. The second thing that Hubert Joly shared a couple of weeks ago, and it's one that we've really been pushing on, and I'll get into more depth when I see you October 20th with all of these topics we're going to talk about, is he said, look, it's crazy for you to open up any leadership team meeting, and I hope everybody on the call has at least their weekly meeting where you've gathered your team to kind of go over what is the priority, the sprint for the week, if you would, our theme for the day, you know, what we're focused on this next quarter, reviewing those. He said it's a little crazy if we don't open it up with, but what are we hearing from the marketplace? What are we hearing from customers and employees? And we'll get into the detail of a weekly agenda. That's how specific we're going to be. I'll share with you what I consider the most important 5 minutes of your 168-hour week, that if you can just do that with your team, those 5 minutes, it can do a lot to increase the productivity and engagement of your particular teams. But we'll save that for October 12th. But one of the things that we've changed is the order of our weekly meeting agenda. And we moved up, what are we hearing from customers and employees? We moved that up to just after this opening 5 minutes. So I'll be on a webinar here in a few hours with an organization called the Reardon Clinic. We work with the Apollo Hospital Group there in India quite closely. I'm the vice chairman of the board. And when I first joined the board, our quarterly board meetings would, and even though we're a for-purpose nonprofit organization, we would open up with the financials from the last quarter. All right, what was our revenues and what were our expenses and how did the, vitamin shop work and all that stuff? What were the numbers? And then I read Hubert Joly's book, The Heart of Business, which I think, again, everyone on this call should take a look at. I called it the #1 business book the year it came out 2 years ago. And so what I did is I said, look, team, board, the docs, let's spend the first 45 minutes not plowing through a whole series of slides on how we're doing financially. I want to hear about how are we doing with our patients. We do a net promoter score. And the clinic's about 5 million revenue. So we're probably on par with some of those of you that are on this call. And I said, first, I want to hear, how are we doing with our patients? By the way, we call our patients co-learners. We'll talk about October 12th. One of the important decisions to make is, how do you refer to your customers? Are they customers? Are they clients? American Express card holders? We're members. We used to call our clients gazelles. Now we call them scale-ups. But how do you refer to your customer? It really matters. And so we refer to our patients as co-learners. So we look at all their NPS scores. We look at every one of the comments that they had put in over the last 90 days. And then we invite the doctors as part of our clinic into our board call, because I want to hear what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what we can do to support them. And by starting the meeting with, all right, what are we hearing from our customers and our employees? Now I've got context for the financials that we're looking at, and I've got a much better set of insights into the decisions we've got to make. Now, how's that played out? Early on, and we've got thousands of companies in India that are utilizing our tools. And one of the gentlemen early on that gave me a phone call was Sanjeev Mahanti. Sanjeev had been appointed the MD of Benetton India. Now, at the time, Benetton, was a dying brand, and in India, it was like in last place as a fashion brand. But he was young and he was excited for this opportunity. And one of the things that we do know is this, and we've seen it with Satya Nadella at Microsoft, and we actually hosted at Harvard, Mary Murphy. I'll be bringing some of Mary Murphy's ideas in with me October 12th. Mary's who took over for Carol Dweck. Carol's the famous growth mindset guru. She's retired, and she passed the torch to Mary Murphy. Mary's been the one studying the importance of establishing a growth mindset within business. She's got a new book coming out next March. It'll be her first. I feel honored. I'm featured in her book as well. And one of the key things is you may have a growth mindset. Thank you for taking the time to tune in to learn some things. But are you creating a culture of learning? Our view is you're not winning or losing. You're either winning or learning. Or somebody said you're either earning or you're learning. And that's what we saw at Satya Nadella, the change he made at Microsoft, going from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. By the way, the fact that he named it is been powerful. Everybody can refer to it, and everybody talks about it inside Microsoft. As a result, they're the second largest market cap company in the world, driving valuation. So I want to go back to Sanjeev Mahanti. So he comes in, he's excited for this opportunity. And the first thing he does, as we suggest, is set a big, hairy, audacious goal. One of Jim Collins' ideas, And by the way, it needs to be at least 10 years out or people can debate you and think you're crazy. So he says, I want to be the #1 fashion brand in India. Now, this is crazy because Levi Strauss has held that distinction for decades. But anyway, he planted a flag. And so we begin meeting, and I could tell, and this is what you've really got to be thinking about. Are you just sitting around making stuff up? Is it just a bunch of leaders talking? And by the way, most of our weekly meetings, we're talking about us, our issues. We just lost our receptionist, or we just, having this issue. And the market's like, but what about us? But what about us? Well, we're too busy. We're here dealing with our own issues. And so in those first meetings, I could tell that Sanjeev and his team, and at the time, Benetton had 104 stores in India, that they were just making stuff up. There was no insight from the market at all. And so I said, all right, here's your assignment. We've got to get you back on a diet of figuring out what's going on with your customers and your employees. And so Sanjeev did something very simple. He put a card up next to each of the cash registers there in his stores, and he had his picture on it. And he said, look, if any of you have any ideas, complaints, concerns, suggestions, thoughts, please email me. And by the way, it was as much for his employees as it was his customers. Now, he was doubtful that he'd even get one email. But to his surprise, they began averaging almost 200 every day. And as you know, the culture which I love in India, I had a chance to live in India for a while. We were in Hyderabad with our family, and I've spent many, many years over there. The one thing I do love is your culture has ideas. Your culture has opinions. Your culture loves to debate and discuss things. And so with 200 of these suggestions coming in every day, Sanjeev did three things. First, he obviously put a team together to look at that intel. And by the way, that's one of the major uses of AI today. How do we use AI to be able to gather all of this intel that's coming in and make some sense of it? Look for the patterns. Number two, he said, all right, I'm going to look at the subject lines of every one of those emails. And that was like Warren Buffett looking at the headlines of the news every day. That's given him a good gut feel for how he's going to scale his fortune. And then he said, number three, I'm going to pick one that interests me, that catches my attention, and I'm going to reach out to have a phone call. He needed to get himself back immersed in his marketplace. And he began to get a sense of what was happening in every one of his 104 stores. Again, as many of emails were coming from his team as they were from his customers. One of my favorite stories, it's a Saturday, and an email comes in and the subject line says, acid wash jeans fell apart, disintegrated. Now that caught his attention. And then he looks at who sent it and he's like, I think this is one of the ministers of India. And so he goes like, all right, I'm going to email this guy back. Hey, Sanjeev Mohanty, MD of Benetton India, would love to have a phone call, find out what happened here and apologize. So he has the phone call on Saturday. By the way, was able to build a bridge there with some leadership within the country. And sure enough, they must have had a batch problem with that, group of jeans that they manufactured acid washed. And so they were able to quickly get those pulled off the shelves. Well, the rest is history. And look, your success is the sum total of your decisions, but those decisions that you and your team and the market are making need to be informed. So what are your routines around feeding your decision-making process? Within 36 months, Benetton became the #1 fashion brand. Just before the pandemic hit, that my last time I was there in India in 2019, Sanjeev Mohanty won the Retail Icon Award of India for the results that he was able to achieve. And who did it upset? Levi Strauss. So what did Levi Strauss do? Hired him. And so Sanjeev ran half the planet, all of Asia, for Levi Strauss. Here's a young guy who wasn't known at all, put in this job of Benetton India, turns it around using our tools from day one, our people, our strategy, our execution and cash tools, becomes the person running half the globe for Levi Strauss. And I don't know if you saw recently, but Levi got a new woman, CEO. They have moved Sanjeev, I just heard from him about 2 months ago, out to San Francisco where they're headquartered. And they put him in charge now of all of the Americas. My bet is, and I'm saying it here on this webinar, that we will have yet another Indian leader of a Fortune 500 company soon. I think they're grooming him to go in line. And by the way, the first thing he did when he got that position is he called me up and he goes, Verne, I need a box of books. How quick can you get to Bangalore to train our Levi team on scaling up? That was April of 2020. So you know what happened. I wasn't able to go there in person because of the pandemic, but he was able to get his team up to speed on scaling up. And so first, what's your theme for the year? At least this next quarter. What's the one thing that you're going to work on with your team? And I want you to wander around and say, all right, but is that going to sell more flowers? Is that going to get us more efficient? Is that going to get us in the server business, which was one of the themes Michael Dell put in place early on because he was getting killed by Compaq computer. Number two, for you to decide what is your priority today, what is the sprint for this week, what is your theme for the quarter, is it informed? What intel do you have from your people and your marketplace that gives you a sense that this is what we ought to be working on? And that's what that weekly meeting of Mark Zuckerberg's with his team does. It's called Q&A with Mark. It's much allowing his people to inform him. What are they hearing? What are they seeing? What are they thinking? as it is him sharing how are we doing on our focus for the year and this quarter. And so hopefully you'll have some mechanisms for gathering that customer and employee intel. I'll share one story that I probably won't get to in October, but I was called in to a company called Deltec. At the time, they had about 70 employees. They had decided that they wanted to be the #1 provider of accounting software for the government contractor sector. And that leads to a second thing we're going to discuss in October, which is the riches are in the niches. I'll say it again. The riches are in the niches. It's your ability to go ahead and say, look, in the beginning, we sold to anybody who would buy from us. But at some point, you've got to make a decision. And I'll tell a quick kind of startup story of Airbnb in a moment. But you've got to choose what is the specific kind of buyer persona, core customer, whatever term you want to give it. Deep ran through our 7 strata strategy a couple of weeks ago on a webinar. But you've got to decide who is our core customer. And if you think it's everybody, then that's your fatal mistake. And so you've got to get clear about who that core customer is. I'll tell the Airbnb story real quick. So, Nate is one of the co-founders with Brian Chesky, and no one can ever remember the third founder. You don't want to be the third founder. But anyway, they launch Airbnb. And the Democratic convention in Denver, of all things, when Barack Obama got the nomination. And they got a few people to rent some bedrooms, but it was nothing. And they couldn't get, nothing was growing. So then they went to South by Southwest, which will be coming up in March, where Mary Murphy's releasing her book. They rent a few bedrooms, but nothing big. Anyway, they mess around for 5 years and they can't get hardly any revenue. So they finally talked their way into the Y Combinator. And we do a lot of stuff with Techstars, which is one of the great incubators founded by one of my students from that MIT program, Brad Feld. And Paul Graham goes, all right, guys, you've been here for a year at Y Combinator or incubator, like the accelerator program at EO. And you don't seem to be really making any headway. So he goes, all right, where are your best customers? And like 3 young entrepreneurs, they go, they're everywhere. Like our customers are everybody. He goes, no. Right now, where do you have the most customers, the most beds? Now, look, they've been at this for 6 years and they're in Silicon Valley. They said, we have 20 beds in New York City on the other side of the United States. So Paul Graham said, all right, guys, you're going to pack up and you're going to go move in with your customers. That's how close you've got to get to the marketplace. And look, if you're Airbnb, you can do that. So they go to New York, they go stay at the Airbnbs of the 20 customers they had. And you know what? They found it. Usually, if you're not scaling your company as easy as you would like, as fast as you would like, if you're not scaling the value or valuation of the business as much as you have, my experience is it's just 1 or 2 things that you're missing, that if you can find that and tweak it, and that's what we're going to dig into, is how you do that more in detail when I see you October 12th. Anyway, they found it. They fixed the 2 things, and I'll share with you in October what the 2 things are they found and fixed. But they changed those 2 things, and then more importantly, they stayed in New York till they went from 20 beds to 200, till they 10x. And because we know this, for you to 10x, you're going to have to do something different. For you just to 2x, you can sort of limp along, doing the same things a little better than you were doing, but you're not going to get that leap that I hope many of you would like to achieve, even if nothing else, your own freedom, as we helped Alan Rudy go from 80-hour work weeks to 8 hours, what it took for him to run the business so he could get out and do the more market-facing activities that are critical if you're going to scale. Well, the rest is history. Once they got from 20 beds to 200 beds, in their case, their niche was New York City. They stayed focused and made it in New York, forgot about, let's forget about trying to expand in any other markets. And because a lot of people come to New York, that then they took back the idea to Paris and London and Rome and every place else. Now, let's speed forward. I don't know if you saw the news, but what has Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, been doing the last 6 months? He went back out living in Airbnbs because, again, their scale had stalled. And the only way you're going to figure it out is to go immerse yourself in the marketplace. So he just came off spending 6 months living in Airbnbs as the CEO of Airbnb. And he said he found it. He found the one thing that they needed to change. By the way, whenever I share what it is, which I will in October, it always looks obvious in hindsight. But that's the point. It's usually right there in front of you and you can't see it because you're stuck. You're so immersed in working in the business that you have no time to work on it and no time to really get the insights that are necessary for you to make the one or maybe two decisions that will unleash the value and the power of your business. So anyway, they found it. They've already begun to execute on it, and we're seeing the results in the valuation. My buddy, by the way, David Risher, just took over as CEO of Lyft, the competitor to Uber. And 3 days into the job, he posted, because we were all watching how he's doing, that he finally got certified to drive. And he has been spending a good part of his time driving cars and talking to customers, talking to riders, talking to other drivers. And he's just been in the job a few weeks. And yesterday, they made a significant announcement, some things that he's already, by the way, he found the one thing. He's already made changes to that one thing, and we're seeing the ridership in Lyft against Uber continuing now to rescale. And yesterday they made an announcement that I don't know whether it's going to materially make a change in the revenue and usage of Lyft, but it gave them a tremendous amount of attention, particularly here in the United States in the marketplace. But again, he started his journey as the new CEO of Lyft, immersed with customers. We'll see how it turns out, but there's a new CEO yet again at Starbucks. Howard Schultz has not done a good job choosing who's going to be his successor. But this new CEO, what's the first thing he's doing? He is working as a barista once a month so that he is immersed back with his marketplace. And so that's where you want to start, is to make sure that you're feeding your decision-making with input from customers and employees. But that means you've got to start with the niche that you want to focus on. Now, once you've decided, if I'm Southwest Airlines, they're going to be traveling salespeople. If I'm Domino's Pizza, it's college kids who want their faces fed fast. Then here's the question I've had business owners, investors, if you would, really hone in on. And that is the most important strategy question that was ever popularized by the late Clay Christensen at Harvard. And rest his soul, he passed away from a long-standing illness last year. And that question very simply is, what is the job to be done? You can say, and all of you in your description said, I'm in this business, I'm in this business, I'm in this business. But what is the job the customer needs you to do for them? And one of the things that I'll show, watch it before I get there October 12th, but we're going to take 4 minutes and we're going to watch Clay Christensen's famous video, Job of a Milkshake. And right now, just Google it, job of a milkshake deep. You can probably find it and send the link into everybody. But I want your team to not only watch that video, I want you to study that video. I'm going to debrief it with you when I see you October 12th, because there's a lot of important nuance in there. But it wasn't until Wendy's figured out why people were buying a milkshake at 8 o'clock in the morning for their commute, were they then able to understand how to improve it. By the way, they'd been running focus groups, and as you know, Steve Jobs hated focus groups as well. You can't have customers theoretically sit around and suggest things. I remember when they did a focus group for the iPod. They wanted to ask the participants, they wanted to try to get at what would be the best color for an iPod. And the group's consensus was yellow. Then what they did is they said, okay, as you leave, just to thank you for spending time with us, grab your favorite iPod. And everybody chose white. So you can't believe what people say. You have to watch what they're doing. And you're going to see that detailed in this 4-minute video on job of a milkshake. And once Wendy's found out, that's the job a milkshake does for the commuter, then they knew how to improve it. Then they knew how to make changes to it. They knew then how to really goose up the revenue. By the way, it's not covered in the video, but we have additional intel. They then found out that there was a different buyer persona in the afternoon, and they had a different job that milkshake needed to be done. And that allowed them to make changes to that milkshake that was different than the one they were selling at 8 o'clock in the morning. And that really goosed up the sales of their milkshake. So are you super clear? What is the job to be done by your company for the marketplace, by your product or service? To give some obvious examples, in a word, what job does Google do for us? Well, it's search. I have a question. I'm looking for something. I need an answer. And Google then decided they're going to go off and try to do a bunch of other stuff like Nest thermostats and Google Glass and these things. But the problem was their name, Google, was so tied to this word or two you own, which, by the way, is brand. That's the essence of brand. Let me say it again. What you're trying to create as a business owner, as an investor, is a brand. Now, why is brand important? Because first, if you have brand, it lowers your marketing costs. You ultimately want customers to call you instead of you having to call customers. That's where we get a lot of our clients, is to the point where they have such brand that the phone's just ringing. They're not out having to try to pitch what it is that they do, because you're very clear what it is we do, the job that needs to get done to the marketplace. And the second thing brand does, besides lower your marketing costs, is it gives you pricing power. One of the topics I'm going to be on tour of is the importance of making decisions around pricing and compensation. And I want you to think about compensation as just pricing internally. And we're going to discuss why we get pricing so wrong and compensation so wrong, and how your largest single expense ends up becoming literally a downer inside your own organization. So how do you get those decisions right? We're going to dig into very specific ideas and examples of other companies and how they're using those two levers. So you want brand. Brand lowers your marketing costs and it increases your pricing power. And so the key to brand is being clear. What's the job to be done? What's the word or two or the phrase that you own? The iPod, by the way Steve Jobs, who was a genius at job to be done, was It's to hold 1,000 songs in your pocket. Once he was able to say, hey, why do you need this device called an iPod? It allows you to put 1,000 songs in your pocket. Now we got it. Now we all wanted it, and we can move forward. So Google had this problem. They're so associated with the word search that they even formed a new brand, Alphabet, to stuff all of those other businesses in it. Well, guess what? They declared a few months ago that their $2 trillion evaluation was all essentially due to search. And they think their next trillion in valuation is going to come from search. And here's the concern. In some sense, they were so distracted by all that other noise and things they thought they were going to do that they fell behind on this AI thing. And with Microsoft owning OpenAI, Google is really playing catch up in that particular space of search. Now people are searching ChatGPT for answers, not just Google. And so we want you to get clear, who is your core customer? And then what is the job to be done? And I'll be using a lot of mid-market examples, small and mid-sized company examples when I see you October 12th, including a company called Winterhalter. It's not Facebook or Google. They make commercial dishwashers. But we're going to talk about how they figured out which of the 5 niches they were serving that they were going to go after exclusively. We're going to discuss what I call the 770 rule, which is, look, anyone who thinks they're going to have market share is crazy. What you want is profit share. And even you can look at the most major brands like Apple. They barely have double-digit market share. But what you want to do is you want to own the profit share of the industry. And so, look, revenue's vanity, profit sanity, and then cash is king. And so once you've got clear what is the job to be done and who your core customer is, then you can set your tagline for the business. That way everybody knows why I need you, how I can find you, and the phone is ringing for you instead of you having to chase people down. And that's ultimately what we want to achieve and help you as you scale your business. And to do that, we're going to help you work on the people side of the business, particularly a secret we've learned around finding the right fishing hole to find talent. And once you get a consistent fishing hole, and then we'll discuss what is your number one source for talent. Now that I've got the right people, next, can we nail the strategy, job to be done, as Deep took you through on the 7 strat, and we'll dig into that when I see you October 12th. Then ultimately, you've got to execute on it. It's one thing to make this stuff up, but there we'll talk about the 3 most important original Rockefeller habits, the wealthiest guy ever on the planet, not that that matters, but those 3 fundamental disciplines or habits has helped Atlassian go from the 50 employees when they first started with us to 10,000 and a $50 billion market cap. Scott's endorsement now is now on the front of the book of scaling up. But those 3 fundamental disciplines are, and look, if for some reason you're not scaling as easy and as fast and as profitable as you would like, it's one of 3 things. Number 1, priorities. You're either working on too many things or you're working on the wrong thing. Number 2, it's because you're not informed by the right data, that is from the market and your employees, that qualitative and quantitative data. By the way, one of the things we'll talk about, hopefully you've all read or seen the movie Moneyball, but what is the ultimate Moneyball stat for your company? Baseball was measuring a lot of stuff that didn't matter. And I see a lot of our companies, clients, when we first meet with them, measuring all kinds of stuff that doesn't matter. By the way, that's one of the jobs AI is, again, helping us do, is sort out What are the stats that really drive performance versus stats we've just been measuring because that's the way it's done in our industry? And so what is the right data? Are you looking at the right metrics? On-base percentage, they found out in baseball. And then number three, it does you no good to have this information if you don't get around a table and talk about it. And at the heart of our work is this, it seems crazy, but this daily huddle for 8 minutes. We're talking about 8 minutes, a restroom break. But you do that 8 minutes right. First, we know if you move faster, you will if you pulse faster, you will scale faster. And it takes 6 data points to see a trend. So if you're only looking at your numbers once a month, you don't have a clue for a half a year what's going on. If you look at them weekly, it's still going to take you a month and a half. But like Sanjeev Mohanty, who was looking at what he was learning daily, in 36 months, he became the #1 fashion brand in India. So if you want to move faster, you need to pulse faster. And we're going to do an actual daily huddle October 12th with the team. Going to show you exactly how it's done. And by the way, you want to talk about 10x? That's your biggest 10x on time. Every minute your team member is in a daily saves every member individually 80 minutes, almost an hour and a half. And that 10x return on your time and insight is invaluable. So there it is, priorities, data, and meeting rhythm. And getting those 3 in place are critical, which means I want to come back. I haven't got to this part yet of an Elon Musk biography. I'm going to try to get her done by this weekend. But when Walter Isaacson wrote the book on Steve Jobs, this is what he was able to uncover. First, Steve was very clear. And this is the third decision you've got to make. Who's our core customer? What's the job to be done? And then, what is the soul of your business? Tom Peters was the great original business guru. He's the one who created this industry, wrote a book called In Search of Excellence, endorsed my first book, it was my cover endorsement. And dear friend, he just retired at age 80 last fall. He said, you can outsource everything but your soul. And by the way, India is scaled because you've been like the outsourced king and queen of the world, people outsourcing all kinds of things to you. But you can do that except for your soul. And what Steve Jobs understood was the soul of Apple, in a word, was design. That's what put him on the map, and it kept him on the map. And so Steve did 2 things when he came back to turn around his baby. First, he turned the conference room he had into a situation room. And the 4 people he chose, and we'll talk about, we have a tool called FACE, Function Accountability Chart. The 4 people he chose to help him turn Apple around, they met and really lived together in that room every day. Then, because he knew the soul of the business was design, he had lunch every day. He met with the design team every day as he was scaling up. Not once a week, not once a month, but every day. And then he knew, as we talk about, the most important function for scaling. They all matter, but the one that matters the most if you want to scale is marketing. And Steve chaired a 3-hour marketing meeting every Wednesday afternoon. By the way, we also know, what did he spend the rest of his afternoons doing? Tracking down customer issues. Again, he wasn't a guy that was going to go out and hang out with customers and stuff, but he'd grab a hold of a customer issue and track it down inside Apple at the chagrin of everybody else, saying, look, we got to figure out the root cause of why we missed this. So there it is. They made great decisions because he understood the job to be done. They knew their core customers. It's not everybody. You know, they still only have globally 14% market share across all their product lines as a $3 trillion valued company. And all of those decisions were informed by immersing himself in customers' issues and challenges and wants and desires. And then, because the soul of the business was design, he met with Jonathan Ive and the team every day. When Nate and the boys got in trouble with Airbnb, I said, Nate, what did you guys do at the beginning of the pandemic? He said, we went into a daily huddle 7 days a week, not just 5, all the way up through and post IPO, which they still do today. And so these fundamental Rockefeller habits have helped people turn around some of the most iconic brands, whether it's Sanjeev Mohanty with Benetton now helping run Levi Strauss globally, Steve Jobs turning around Apple Computer, or the 80,000 plus companies that we now in my 41st year have helped scale successfully. I'm really looking forward to spending some real quality time dealing with these kind of specifics and practicalities with you October 12th. Now, with that, I think we've got Deep about 6 minutes here for some Q&A. Any topic, pricing, compensation, any of this you'd like to deal with, let's open up for Q&A. Or let me leave early and I'll go get some breakfast. So.
Absolutely. If there's one quick question, we can answer that and then we can wrap. If you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll get to you. Otherwise, we'll let go and eat some breakfast.
We'll put it in chat.
I guess, you know what? We can.
And by the way, I want to leave them with a question.
Yeah, please.
And it's next week. I'm hosting our next CEO boot camp. And the opening question is, okay, given where you are, what are the 3 constraints? Not problems, because these constraints could be your biggest opportunity. But for you to figure out what this theme is for the next 90 days or 12 months. You're in your second quarter of most fiscal years, as you detailed, or the second half here. The thing you've got to be clear on is, what are our 3 constraints? What's in the way of us scaling? So let me finish a story that I started as a way to end. So I want to come back full circle. I'm invited in by a guy named Ken Delasky with a company called Deltec. 70 employees wanting to do software that does accounting for a niche, and that is government contractors. And I visit the company, and by the way, he wanted to be number 1 in this space. I could tell after my first visit that he would be that, and they did. Deltec went on to become, from 70 employees to a company at the time worth over $1 billion. And what did I see? I saw 2 things. I go into the technical support area. They had 4 people answering the phones, answering, customers having issues with the software. And there was a dude sitting there who's not answering any phones, doesn't really look like he's interested in talking to any human beings, just doing this. And I said, who's that guy? He goes, that's one of our programmers. He says, every programmer is required to work a half a day a week from this cubicle so they can overhear what are the customers' questions about the software that the technical support people are having to answer. And the technical support people can say, look, I have no idea, but I have one of the people who wrote the software sitting right here. I said, now I get it. They are short-circuiting what's customer intel, market intel, and getting it right into the software changes. Then I see a second cubicle and it's empty. I'm like, all right, who sits there? And it was Ken Delasky, the CEO, the founder. He said, Verne, I spend 1 day a week doing my CEO stuff from that cubicle so I can hear what are the customers, what are the questions that are being asked about the software, where are people having challenges and what's not easy, and we'll talk about that as an important strategy, the easy button. And I knew then, because he had a minute by minute routine of getting customer intel into his software and in his thinking, that they would be number one in their marketplace decades later. And he achieved it. So that's part of the Rockefeller habits. Let's get in a room. Let's talk about the stuff that matters, intel, and then let's set some priorities that are right. And ultimately, if we can create brand, people are clear the job you do for them, best Italian restaurant in Delhi, then they're going to know how to find you. And they're going to come to you instead of you having to chase them. And what does that do? I want to leave you with what I think is the most important KPI that I want you to start obsessing on. And it ties in with the year of efficiency, and that is, what is your gross margin dollars, your total gross margin dollars divided by your number of full-time equivalents? You could also look at what is our gross margin dollars per dollar or ringgit or whatever currency you guys are calculating in per that in our case dollar of payroll. That's going to tell you whether you've just been throwing people at the problem or if you're truly gaining efficiencies within the organization. My guess is, and you had Ram Charan was on tour for some of the EO chapters, one of the great Indian gurus. Most of us could scale double, triple, or quadruple our size of our company with no additional people if we could just get our processes and our efficiencies much better. And you do that, less people paid more versus more people paid less. That is a great combination moving in here to the rest of the 21st century. Deep, with that, I think we're right at the top of the hour for you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you so much, Verne. It was great learning, and I look forward to seeing you here in India. I look forward to seeing everybody register for the event.
All right.
Thank you, Verne.
And by the way, make sure everybody brings their teams. That was the big thing I learned at the MIT program. We were only educating the CEO, and they would run back and hit the rest of their team who's like, all right, you've been to one of those crazy workshops again. This too shall pass. That's why you have it set up. We have round tables, right?
Yes.
In the room. And the idea is for you to, and that's what Sanjeev Mohanty did. He brought his team. Ashiana Housing had me educate all 70 of their senior leaders. That's what Quest Global, who's now become a multi-billion-dollar company. When they weren't that when we first started with them down in Bangalore. And this 117-year-old company that is based out of Calcutta, the founders brought me over to their 50,000 square meter palace. They had not been doing anything on the Rockefeller habits. But he said, you know what? We got to quit just throwing people at the problem. And they hosted me for 500 of their leaders that they could fit there. So step one is get more people on your team on board. It makes it 10 times easier to implement what it is that we teach. So I hope to see you and your team October 12th in Delhi. Deep, thank you so much.
Thank you, Verne. Thank you, everyone. It was great seeing you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. You can send us an email on info@scalingupindia.in, and we will reach out to you. Make sure you have everything to register. We have some of the largest Indian companies who've registered. We've got Polycab. We've got people from Aditya Birla Group. We've got Hindalco. So we've got some very, very large companies. There's a very large tech company that's actually sending 50 people to the event. One that's actually your friend. And so we have a really great day planned for you. So look forward to seeing you. Thanks again, Verne. It was wonderful seeing you.
You bet. Bye, Deep.
Bye.
Thank you, Verne. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Wonderful seeing you. Bye. Feel free to click on the QR code if you want to register or send us an email.